Welcome to Doing Good by Doing Better, the podcast for world shapers, not spectators. I'm Margaret Rogers, CEO of Pariveda, a professional services firm that helps make potential possible for our clients. On this show, I talk with founders, executives, and innovators who share hard lessons, bold ideas, and real strategies for purpose-driven growth. This episode will offer practical insights you can use this week to solve forward. Because at Pariveda, we know that doing good only endures when we keep learning how to do better. Today I'm with Dr. Rebecca Parsons, an icon in the technology world and a self-declared nerd. She was the CTO at ThoughtWorks for 16 years, holds a PhD in computer science from Rice University, and received an Abby Award from AnitaB.org for her contributions to technology and society, in addition to her service with other non-for-profit boards like CodeChicks and Agile Alliance. You totally want her in your corner. In this conversation, we explore how responsibility shows up in daily engineering decisions, what it means to design for people rather than features, and how to anticipate unintended consequences of technology. Let's jump in. I'm so excited to have you here. Can I just tell you? You and I met through a mutual connection through Tiffany Lenz, who now works for Pariveda. And of course, she worked with you at ThoughtWorks. And when I met you, I hope it's not one-sided, but I wanted to tell you how much I connected with you and the way you thought about things. Like the conversation was just so fantastic. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Yeah, I thought it was a great conversation, and it's always nice to talk to people who understand the situation that you're in and they're bringing their own life experiences. It's just exciting. It's like, yes, I really like this person.
Exactly. Well, I would love to hear what's something that's been energizing you lately. Like, what are you working on or what are you writing these days? I mean, you're a prolific writer.
Well, I've often said I've been through a lot of AI winters. I first started dabbling in and being interested in AI a very long time ago. We'll just leave it at that. I dropped years in the business from my bio a long time ago because I would have had to have started at like -12 for it to be a sensible age. But what I'm finding both fascinating as well as potentially concerning, this is the first iteration of AI that people who are not computer scientists or AI researchers get to interact with directly. And that's exciting because the potential uses and how might this make my workflow as a marketing person or a paralegal or, a tax accountant is now being thought about by legal assistants and tax accountants and marketing managers, as opposed to AI researchers or computer scientists who I have no idea what my tax accountant does. Thank you very much. And so I think it's a great opportunity. But even if you extend outside that into corporate leadership and such, there aren't a whole lot of people out there who really understand how the technology is working and what it can do well and when you shouldn't try to do something with it. And, Gen AI is so hot. And years ago, when a colleague of mine I had to do a talk, take over for Martin Fowler because he had a family emergency and we had to walk on this stage, and I think it was Java 1, and say, my name is not Martin Fowler. But fortunately, nobody left. But that's when the term POJO, plain old Java objects, was coined in that. Well, I talk about plain old fashioned AI because there's still a lot you can do with the AI technology that's been used for years. And so I find it fascinating watching how our industry is once again trying to figure out how to embrace, not over-embrace, not run scared from the room in this latest iteration of AI.
Oh, that's huge. I think you and I talked about this before, where another parallel that you can draw is when social media came out and everybody had access to it and you could see its potential and you could see all the wonderful things. And yet it was a tool that was entered into our society without a lot of knowledge on how it really worked. And all the algorithms that go in the background to influence people in one way or the other. Mm-hmm. And now as it's starting to surface, more and more in the foreground, it's really starting to really shine a light on the impacts of that. And I think AI is definitely in that space, right?
Oh, yes. Mark Zuckerberg did not set out to cause massacres in faraway lands. Sam Altman did not set out to have teenagers commit suicide, you know, but one of the reasons I'm so passionate about what is variously referred to as ethical tech or responsible tech or something like that is we ought to at least try to think about what are the unintended consequences. We can never get them all right because we never know it. But so often we're problem solvers. I have a problem here. This addresses my problem perfectly. And I'm going to wear blinders. And of course, nobody's going to try to use my thing for bad. There are no bad people in the world. I sometimes think as technologists, we are sometimes quite naive.
Mm, yeah, there are no bad tools, but only the hand that wields them, right? So I'd love to talk a little bit more about your leadership journey because it helps us understand and our listeners understand exactly where purpose comes from and how that started to become important for you. So talk a little bit about your journey in your career.
Okay. Part of the purpose, quite frankly, comes from the fact that my father was a priest, not Roman Catholic. He did claim me, and a social worker. And so this whole caring for the rest of the world was just kind of in the air. But I started programming when I was 13 years old and just fell in love with it. I just loved that you could make a computer do things. And this was, again, I think fire had been invented, but.
And it was through a teacher, right? A teacher inspired you to
Yes.
go into coding, right?
Yes. I switched school districts. And anybody who has ever gone to a radically different kind of school district, I went from a rural but very rich school district to not a poor district, but a city district. And they, of course, no, I can't trust the grades you got there because, that's a small place. And I'd learned algebra in 5th grade. This was freshman in high school. And so he tossed me out of class, but he was taking a programming class at the time and bought a copy of the textbook for me. Why our high school had a key punch, I don't know, because we never had any courses. And so he ran my programs for me when he ran mine. And he called me into class every once in a while, gave me the tests to make sure that I had actually covered all of the material as opposed to just some of it. But I just fell in love with it. And then I have been called a rebel. And I can kind of see where that comes from, but it's within a well-defined sphere because I was actually a high school dropout. I'm one of those weird people. I loved summer school. It was summer and it was school. You got both. And so when I was in high school, I took summer school classes. And so I got to the end of my junior year in high school and I had only one class left in order to graduate high school. And I'd already applied to university and been accepted and such. And they didn't actually believe I would do it. And so I called up the university and said, they won't give me my high school diploma. Will you still take me? And they said, of course, we've already accepted you. And so I went off to university. I studied both computer science and economics. And I think that economics background has helped in interfacing with business executives and understanding a little bit more about how they think. I think I've had every kind of job imaginable as an IT person. I worked for Caterpillar Tractor Company initially as a co-op student on COBOL, but then I did factory automation programming and PDP-11 assembler. I was a systems support person as well as a systems programmer writing device drivers. Got to work on serial number 1 of a computer, which was great fun, and worked for Amdahl Communications for a while. And then I went back to graduate school. Spent a few years at Los Alamos studying evolutionary computation as well as parallel and distributed computing. Went to the university, so I've done academic stuff as well as government research stuff, and did a startup while I was at the university very briefly. Then I ended up at ThoughtWorks as a consultant. And I joined in December of 1999, December 14th to be exact. And so I was one of the few people with this amount of gray hair who got to party on December 31st, 1999, because I wasn't mission critical on anything yet.
Oh, I remember the Y2K for sure.
Yes.
You had a really rich career at ThoughtWorks too, and had the opportunity to be part of its growth and its evolution. And during that time, one of the things we talk about is sometimes it's easy to lose sight of your purpose and stay regrounded in a place where you might be richly growing faster than you can keep up with. And so,
Hmm.
how did you navigate that? Like, were there moments that you questioned that, or how did you process that growth along with purpose?
Well, and I think part of it comes down to understanding why you have that purpose. What are you trying to achieve by following that particular purpose? We, in the early years at ThoughtWorks, grew primarily by geographic expansion. We were growing in our individual countries, but the big leaps came when we went to India, when we went to China, when we went to Brazil. And one of the things that we tried to do to maintain that is seed the teams that opened those new offices with not only established thought workers, which is fairly common, but we tried as much as possible to get people who actually lived and worked in that culture. Because one of the things that had been true for so long is you could walk into any ThoughtWorks office and it would be the same and different. There would be things that looked identical. And yet each country, each culture from that country put a particular stamp on it. And we have had to close some offices. And often that happened because in the long run, we couldn't find local leadership that was actually properly aligned. And that's a real problem because what we didn't want to do, part of our purpose, if you will, was we didn't want to be colonizers. Okay, I'm going to go into South Africa and I'm going to run this. Ultimately, we wanted Black Africans to run it. And trying to find the combination of the skill set, the experience, the values alignment, and the ability to work in what had become a pretty complex organization. People were always surprised how many countries we were in because we weren't all that big. And we were in 14 countries. It takes a pretty complex planning system and reporting system and all of that to be able to support that number of currencies, et cetera. And so it wasn't like, okay, we just want you to be a 50 or 75 person office and you don't need that level of management sophistication. Well, no, actually you do. And so I think it was a challenge for us to find that balance between this is what our overall purpose is. This is what we want the global purpose to be. And these are kind of the allowable country level instantiations, if you will. And that can be difficult to navigate sometime.
Yeah, I would imagine. I think one of the things that I loved about you is you said, I'm kind of a rebel, right? And you mentioned being a rebel. And one of the most significant ways I think that you're a rebel is you are a female leader in a global operation for a professional services firm. And there were very few of you when you took that role. And even today, there's just very few women who are in that kind of position. So, what was a moment that you had where you had to decide whether to push through an obstacle or push back, either push through or push back into a system that wasn't quite ready for you yet?
Well, there's two parts to that question. I've spent most of my career in a system that wasn't ready for me. And so I was used to looking around and saying, don't know about this. But on the other hand, I am a geek. I'm a geek through and through. You want to watch my eyes sparkle, get me started on formal programming language semantics or the fun of programming assembler and the architecture of the first system that I coded or, any number of things. I cannot imagine not doing this. And so I was never really tempted not to push through because I would have been miserable. I don't know what else I would have done. And what I did realize, and that this was actually a pretty important moment in my leadership journey. We were in a planning meeting, and of course, I'm the only geek at the table, and I'm the only woman at the table. And we're putting together the plans for the following year and all of this kind of stuff. And I asked a question, and I got a very strange answer back. And I looked around the rest of the table, and nobody seemed worried. And it's like, well, clearly, they know something I don't. And so I put myself back in my woman geek, I don't, deserve a seat at the table kind of box. And the conversation went on. And the issue that I had asked about came to pass. And I looked metaphorically in the mirror and said, that's on me. I could have pulled somebody aside at the next break and said, why aren't you worried about that? But I didn't. And I want to make it very clear. I put myself in that box. They didn't. And the lesson that I learned from that was twofold. First is I wasn't at that table because I was a geek or because I was a woman. I was at that table because I was Rebecca. And they wanted Rebecca responding, not, here's your box. I've worked with several people who would say, from the X perspective. No, you're not just representing X. You're representing the business. When you're sitting at that table, you are a business leader. You are not an X leader. And the second thing I learned is that it's really easy to do that to yourself. It doesn't take somebody else doing it. And I've always felt that I lived in this wonderful bubble, which it did feel like, because it didn't matter to people that I was a woman. I had the occasional people who got through the screen, the person who said that perhaps women are not as apt at math and computer science as men are, but they never lasted long. But it's very easy to put yourself in that box. And you have to remind yourself, I earned my right at this table, and they want me at this table. They don't want the geek at the table. They want Rebecca at the table. And although I am a geek, I'm a whole lot more than that.
Mm. One of the things I love is that you also serve on boards and have served on boards in the past that really support women and diversity in this space. To your point, like you've served with AnitaB.org, Women Who Code, Agile Alliance, and you've been recognized with an Abby Award, which is amazing. So looking back, was that the moment that helped crystallize for you what about having equity and inclusion in the workplace, that it wasn't just a moral issue, but really a business and innovation imperative in your world?
The time I woke up and said, I might have this wonderful bubble, but the world doesn't have this bubble. I was asked by what was then called ABI, the unintended.org, to sit on a CTO panel. And I was the only woman CTO. And there was a strategy for that, and I agreed with what they were trying to accomplish. But they also had a lottery for graduate students for seats at lunch. And each one of the CTOs sat at one of these tables, and there was about 10 or 11 students, I think. Well, I found out later, the guys just talked about jobs available at their company. But I got to hear these students' stories. And there was one that just made me heartbroken and put me in a rage at the same time. Now, this was roughly 2006. And the woman said, I think I need to leave graduate school, or at least find another advisor, because my advisor told me that I was taking the spot of a man and I should go home and make babies like I was supposed to. In the 21st century.
Wow.
And no, it wasn't in Europe. No, it wasn't in North America. It doesn't matter where it is. And I just sat there and told her that, yes, she should find a different advisor, but no, she should not leave graduate school. And I was livid that this could happen. And I thought, I've never wanted to be a role model. I've never wanted to be on stages. But I thought, if me being out there can help someone like that feel like she can push back, I'll do it. And that was the moment I started getting involved and researching more and realizing that there is a strong purpose and it's just the right thing to do argument for diversity. But there is also a strong innovation argument. And I love the proof. Scott Page wrote the book Difference. And there's actually a proof in there that average heterogeneous teams over a range of problems will outperform exceptional homogeneous teams. And it's brilliant. It basically says if you have a heterogeneous team, you've got a larger number of tools, a larger vocabulary, a larger set of solution frameworks or templates. And you can come up with one because of your background in physics, and I can come up with one because of my background in biology. And we look at each other and say, hey, wait a minute. If you take these parts of yours and these parts of mine and you put them together like this, you have a better answer. And that's the fundamental insight of the proof. But I think part of what you really need to be successful in diversity is to not forget about the right thing to do aspect of it, because from a pure business perspective, the benefits of diversity are medium to long term. When you've got a short-term business imperative in front of you and you need 20 developers and you've got 19 white men standing right there ready to go and you vetted them and the whole bit, are you going to wait 3 months to try to hire a more diverse team? Not if you're going to tank your business. So you're going to hire him and then you're going to get to the end of the quarter and oh my. And I'm not saying you shouldn't hire those 19 people in that situation, but what you should be trying to do over the medium and long term is ensure you're not in that situation. Make sure you've got a robust pipeline of people who do not look like that.
Yeah, it's kind of the dangers of the echo chamber, right? That can
Yes.
catch organizations off guard. I want to switch gears to talk about a little bit about innovation because you write a lot about and speak a lot about hostile tech. You speak about ethical technology as well. In the world of hostile tech, where tech is actually harming people, even when it wasn't designed to, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but can you share maybe something that's not related to AI, a breakthrough that you saw introduced that had the best of intentions, but ended up having some unintended consequences along the way?
I think social media, even in its early days, probably fits that profile. But I think you can also go back to a lot of early process automation, where if you don't understand what is actually making a business process work, which is probably that guy sitting in the corner who's been there for 15 years and knows all the different ways that people screw up along the way. And he knows how to fix it before it actually goes that final step. And we had this great explosion of business process outsourcing. We're going to send all of these business processes over to India. And of course, they collapsed. And not because the Indian people were not capable of doing the process. It's the people who sent the process over basically gave them the happy path. Here's how it works when everything goes swimmingly, but it doesn't go swimmingly. And we had an entire industry that grew up around this notion that you didn't need people to program these systems, and the various incarnations of low code and no code platforms are classics for this. People forget there's an 80-20 rule for a reason. And yes, you could slap together an Excel spreadsheet or an Access database or whatever and solve the happy path. That doesn't take into account that you have this person sitting at the end of the chain saying, okay, this is what went wrong this time. Oh, here's a new one. I haven't seen this one in a while. All of that was done with good intention, but it represented a fundamental misunderstanding of the reality of how hard the problem really was and what it took to make those things work. And it wasn't just the pure paper process. There was an entire socio-technical system surrounding that process. And all they did was they lifted out the process and plunked it down in Bangalore. And lo and behold, it didn't work very well. And people didn't intend that. That's not so much hostile necessarily, but one of the things that resulted from that is for a long time, we had the us and them conversations. I actually consulted for one client who said that they were CMM level 3 capable of hiring incompetent people in India. That's actually how they phrased it. And when you listen to the way the employees based in the US spoke about their Indian colleagues, it was horrendous. But they didn't set up the system in such a way that the folks on the Indian side of the organization could be successful. And they didn't do that intentionally, but I can guarantee it felt pretty hostile to the poor guys in India.
I would imagine so. I know in the age of AI, we mentioned seeing some really unintended consequences of people leveraging AI in ways that we didn't think would be leveraged, such as personal friendship, companionship, therapy, etc. And we're also seeing additional dark uses of AI to be able to generate lots of different ways to spam somebody and try to con them out of things. What if you put on your futurist hat and really zoom out, where do you think humanity could potentially step into maybe 20, 25 years from now?
The reality is that there are bad people in the world. There are people who will make dirty bombs and make chemical weapons and hack into systems, and it's an arms race. And I am both optimistic and pessimistic. I am not at all worried about the world being destroyed by the paperclip production maximizing AI system who decides that it's going to destroy the world because these pesky Homo sapiens are using resources that I could use to make paperclips. I'm not worried about that one at all. But I do worry that we need more people who are willing to look at a system and say, these are the ways that I think people can do malicious things with it, and figure out ways to get around that. And my worry is that we're not devoting enough resources to that. The thing is, you really do have to think like the bad guy. One of the things I learned as a sysad, I do not have any kind of mentality for that. And yet I had to protect my system. And so I asked around and I found the guy who was the best at breaking into systems. And I said, I'll give you the system password if you will keep trying to break into the system without the system password and tell me what I have to do to close the holes. And if you ever misuse that system password, you're out the door. And so we had this deal. And he'd come to me about once every 3 or 4 months and said, I found this, and this is what you need to do to fix it. I could never do that. I don't have that kind of mind. We have to find and cultivate people who have that kind of mind that can be directed to doing it for good purposes rather than nefarious purposes. And fortunately, the guy, he never took advantage of me. And I'm forever grateful to him because I know I couldn't have done that. My mind just doesn't work that way, but some people's do. And we need to find those people and we need to make sure that they can help us. And I don't think enough attention is being paid to that.
I agree. I was thinking about the previous talk that we had where you talked about the reuse or regenerative code, right? Like, how do you make sure coding isn't just kind of thrown out the door? Computing power has become so cheap. Coding has become so cheap, far away from the punch cards that you started with, where every punch card mattered, right? And if you had a mistake, it was really terrible. And now people can just compile and compile and compile. And so the corporate world, or even in the non-for-profit space, all organizations go through this process where every 3 to 5 years they're redoing code and they're kind of throwing the old code away. But you have a very different perspective there. What's your perspective?
Well, the problem with throwing the code away is, how do you know what to replace it with? And organizations think, well, of course we know how this works. I mean, we've been using this system for 20 years. And what they don't think about is the fact that over all that time, gee, the system does this little quirky thing in this situation. So we're going to work the business process a little bit so that that doesn't hurt us. And you've got all of these little things just scattered everywhere. And usually when people say we're going to throw it away and replace it, the phrase you will hear is feature parity. We wanted to do exactly what it did before, including all of those little workarounds that have built up over the years. Well, you don't really want that, but nobody really wants to commit to that idea of, let's rethink how we do things. How do we really want this thing to work? And the advantage of taking that approach is you can start to say, okay, just like any other development effort, where do I start? What's my biggest pain point or my biggest bottleneck or my biggest opportunity? Carve it out. This is how I want that to work. Yes, you're going to build a lot of scaffolding because unless you're incredibly lucky, which of course we never are, you're going to have to go back and forth across the membrane that you're building. And any scaffolding you build will eventually have to go away. So there is an extra cost there. But what you end up with a system that does what you want it to do. And think about, again, what feature parity means. Feature parity means it does exactly the same thing it did a year ago. How many business users don't want any new features at all over the course of a year? I haven't met many.
Me neither.
Yeah. And so you either ask the business to say, put your ideas on hold for a number of months. Or you can start to say, let's start addressing these one at a time. How do you really want this to work? What are you actually trying to achieve? What kind of observability or metrics do you want us to put in to understand how successful this is? You can ask all those questions. And then as you build the new system that you really want, all of those little workarounds just fall on the floor. And that thing that nobody has ever done anything with for the last 4 years never gets rebuilt because nobody wants it. I remember one place I worked and I was on support at the time and I had some spare time. So I was just going through things and I found this report job that every week failed. And so I figured out what was wrong with it and fixed it. And the next week, the person who had been getting this report for months came and said, I didn't get my report. The report he was getting was something like a 150-page core dump. He wasn't looking at it, but he knew the system was working properly because he got this 150-page thing delivered to his office. And then when he actually got the report, he thought the system wasn't working anymore. So we took that report completely out of the flow because clearly it was not serving a purpose. But that's where you get into trouble, because if you never think about the value of the different things that this system is doing, you're going to keep creating 150-page
Core dumps.
core dumps. Yes.
Well, looking a little bit more forward, you often say a technology decision is a bet on the future. I love that statement. And what's a bet that you made it earlier in your career that didn't go the way you expected? And what did it teach you about preparing for change?
I have always felt that there are two different kinds of developers. And of course, it's not a hard division, but an instructive question is you ask them about the last system that they implemented. And an applications person will tell you what the system did, might tell you what the business process was or what the business outcomes were, but it would be very focused on what the system did. Systems people will talk about the tech stack, the programming language, possibly some things about scaling challenges, or if there were particularly stringent resilience requirements, or so, it's all the architectural technical stuff. I have always been very much on the other side, on that system side. And I think in part it's because my first real job was writing PDP 1124 assembler to move things around in an automated warehouse. And so what it means is I never spent very much time in the database modeling world. And now when all of a sudden data is the new oil and all of this, I've been fascinated by knowledge representation. I mean, the very first talk I ever gave was a taxonomy of knowledge representations for artificial intelligence. So it's not that I don't like to think about organizing data, but I talk to people who are really good at modeling, and it's like, how does your mind work? It doesn't compute for me. And I think that's been a problem because I can give advice all day on technology stacks and performance issues and communication problems and all of that, but ask me to look at a data model and yet it's a critical part of the application. But it was something that I went from programming an assembler to writing device drivers and figuring out how to get serial number one of a computer to work. Even the work I did at Amdahl, which was more application, was actually trying to write an intelligent alarm monitor so that if you've got a network of 50 switches and one switch goes down, you're going to get 49 people saying, I can't talk to 12 anymore. And it's all the same failure. And so are there ways that, you can intelligently provide feedback to network operators when things like that go wrong? And that's the easy case to take care of. There are lots of harder cases. But even that, it wasn't really a complex data model, not like an ERP or anything like that. And I think that has to some extent limited the kinds of things I can do. Not that I've ever run out of anything to do.
Yeah, I was going to say you're pretty busy and you're doing pretty well, even with that insight. One of the things I loved learning about you is that you went to Uganda on your sabbatical to really deal with water the idea people need help bringing water closer to the village. And it had unintentional consequences, that particular project. So, can you share the story about this project and those unintended consequences and that experience and how you integrated that learning into yourself?
I learned about this water project while I was in Uganda. I was actually working with UNICEF to try to help them understand what it takes to scale from a proof of concept to a countrywide rollout. But this particular project, an NGO showed up at a village, and every day the women in the village had to walk a mile to the well to get water and then walk back. And so they thought, we can vastly improve the lives of these women by running a pipe from the well to the center of the village, and then they can just go and get their water. And so they did, and it kept being sabotaged. And so they would fix it and it would be sabotaged again. And so finally they decided to send, I believe it was a cultural anthropologist or some person with training like that. And he just talked to the women. And they were the ones that were sabotaging the pipe, because the norms within that village were that the only chance those women had to socialize and interact outside of their home was on the mile walk to the well and the mile walk back. And so these people, being helpful, took away their only opportunity for social interaction. And so that's why they kept sabotaging the pipe, because they wanted to be able to talk to somebody other than the people in their families and all of that. And the thing that I really took away from that is, again, as technologists, our superpower is problem solving, and they saw a problem. These poor women have to walk 2 miles every day. We can fix that. The thing is, we're bringing our value system and our perspective to say, this is the solution to your problem. And when you step back just a little, you can see just how arrogant that is. How in the world should I tell somebody, this is the solution to your problem? I know what's best to solve your problem. And that really got me into the headspace of saying, rather than coming in and saying, I know how to solve your problem, I should go in and say, what kinds of problems do you have? Because that might not be the problem that they consider the most important. And are there ways that I can help you solve that problem? Because you want to turn it around to empower the people who have to live with that. I listened to one NGO representative complain bitterly because they had delivered these mosquito nets to a village to put over the beds to protect against malaria. And these villagers, they were using them to fish with. And why weren't they using it for the purpose that I gave them to them? Well, maybe they thought being able to eat carried more weight than putting them over the beds. But I mean, he was just livid. These people are not. Yeah, and come on, it's their village, it's their life, it's their empty stomach. If that's what they want to do with them, why is that a problem?
A little empathy and perspective goes a long way, right?
Yes.
Especially in the kind of work that we do, for sure. Well, I have a lightning round for you, so I'm going to rattle off a couple of things. Don't think too deeply, just the first thing that comes to your head. What is a book you often recommend?
I'm very careful on who I recommend it to, but Gödel Escher Bach. And I tell people that even my PhD advisor, it took him a couple of years to get through it. And so don't feel like you need to read it overnight.
What's a favorite quote?
The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed.
That's a good quote. And a habit you live by?
I've, for a long time, felt that learning was fun. This goes back to that summer and school. Isn't that cool? By looking at learning as something that is enjoyable rather than a chore, you're never going to become obsolete, because okay, this is just something new I have to learn, and learning is fun, so let's do it.
I love that. I love that a lot, because lifelong learning is a huge thing for all of us here, especially in our firm, and we espouse that all the time. So I love that a lot. Let me ask you, what gives you hope about the future as it relates to technology and society?
I've met enough people who really do care, who really do want to try to do the right thing, that even though there are a lot of people out there who are trying to do the wrong thing, I think we have a shot at overcoming that. Just because We've got bright people who are passionate about doing the right thing and who care about others. And that's a pretty powerful combination.
What encouragement would you give those or offer those leaders that are doing exactly just that?
Do not despair and find a support system. Trying to do stuff like this by yourself with nobody to talk to, I considered one part of my role as steam vent. You can say whatever you want. It'll just be like a steam vent, goes in one side, out the other. If I do hear something that I think I need to do something about, I will ask you. If you say, no, I want to handle it myself, I will do nothing. But mostly I will just let you vent, because sometimes that's all you need to do.
I love that. Mm-hmm. So where can listeners learn more about your work and your writing? I know you have 2 books. Why don't you tell us what those 2 book titles are and where they can go find it?
Building Evolutionary Architectures, which I co-authored with Neil Ford and Pat Qua. That's Amazon. I've done contributions to the ThoughtWorks anthology. I worked extensively with Martin Fowler on the domain-specific languages book, including writing some of the chapters to try to demystify compilers. And I consider occasionally posting on LinkedIn, but I'm contactable on LinkedIn, and if you want to contact me through that. And I do have a blog out there. The last time I blogged was when I was in Uganda, but that's also one of the things that I need to make sure it's right. If I'm going to spend all this time talking about responsible tech, and then I'm not going to think about second and third order consequences, and what I write about, that makes no sense, to me at least. So I don't do a lot of writing, but the writing I do in those contexts, I try to make sure that it is very well thought out.
Thank you very much. I mean, I feel like we got a 3-in-1 kind of opportunity, right? We had the technologist, we have the rebel, and we have the nerd all in one. So thank you so much for just being on our podcast, which is really great to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Margaret. I've enjoyed talking with you again.
Likewise. Thanks for listening to Doing Good by Doing Better. I'm Margaret Rogers, CEO of Pariveda, and I hope this conversation offered you a new way to take your ideas to impact. Follow on Apple or Spotify and join us every other week as we keep learning how to do good by doing better.